Thank you for turning into another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with Shelby, and today's episode is going to be on the crazy twist of the murder of Kay Parsons. And let's get to it. On today's episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday, we are going to be speaking about the death of Kay Pearson and the crazy twist that I certainly thought was a crazy twist, and maybe you will too. Let's get into it. This episode takes place in Grovetown, Georgia, in the Columbia County Sheriff's Department is mainly who took over this case. It was mainly Staff Sergeant Jimmy Edmonds. If you hear me say Staff Sergeant or Edmonds, this is who I'm speaking about, and he has been with the Sheriff's Office for a total of 27 years at the time of this case. On March 25th of 2009 at 9 a.m., there was a 911 call made from a handyman at 229 Hot Springs in Georgia. The back door had been broken, and the handyman called in to the homeowner with no response, as he was supposed to meet her to help fix something. The house was ransacked, and as clearing the house, there's blood all over the walls and floor. Lots of blood. Kay Parsons was found in the garage. She was covered in blood, laying in a pool of blood, and there was a baseball bat next to her and a claw hammer. And the staff sergeant said it looked like she had fought for her life because she had many defensive wounds. She had a faint heartbeat, so when the officers had found her, they rushed her to the hospital. When her husband was contacted, he was in California at the time, and he was rushed back as soon as he could. And when he got there, he found that she was brain dead, and he pulled the plug. This was the murder of Kay Parsons. She was just the wife and a mother of a son named Derek, who had just brought him to school and came back to be brutally beaten. The house next door was also ransacked and broken into. Can you imagine being beat with a baseball bat? It's got to be close to torture, if not torture. Many people thought, was this random? Is it going to happen again? However, luckily, the house next door to Kay's house was empty at the time. There was blood on the second house next door on the back door, telling Staff Sergeant Edmonds they went there second, after killing Kay's. Staff Sergeant Edmonds said it made no sense. If you just went next door and ransacked a house and beat someone so bad that they were close to death and ended up dying, that's in the future, by the way, that they were close to death, you wouldn't go next door and ransack another house. You would get out of there. So he found that to be very suspicious. This is that future part that I mentioned about or before, that David, like I said, was in California. That's Kay's husband. He was informed of his wife's beating and that she was in the hospital. He rushed back as soon as he could, only to find out that she was brain dead and on life support. That's when he decided to pull the plug. So I did it a little prematurely, but it happened at this point here. Katie Beasley was a journalist, and she said she started to feel like it was more personal than a random attack. Then she said she started thinking, why these two houses? Why these people? By the way, in case I didn't mention it before, it is Kay and David Parsons are the family that lived in the house that Kay died in, obviously. Becky and Tony Sears had two sons. They were next door, the ones that weren't home. They had two sons from she had two sons from a previous marriage, and then they had three sons together. So she had a total of 5 sons. They've been close ever since they moved in. They would do tennis together. Their boys would play sports together. They were around the same age. So they were like really, really close friends. Staff Sergeant Edmonds saw someone sitting across the street watching the whole ordeal. It was a young kid, and he walked over to get his information. And he saw, while his feet were crossed like this, sorry, that was probably loud, I hit my mic, that he had glass on the bottom of his shoes. I will put a photo somewhere. And he said this made him think, glass from breaking into the house, glass all over the floor, glass on the bottom of the shoe. He became a number 1 suspect. So they do some digging. They find out his name is Michael. I want to say he's the older son. So it's Bowers, it was the name, I want to believe. I'll probably correct myself throughout this video if I'm wrong, but Michael had glass on the bottom of his shoes. This stuck out to Staff Sergeant Edmonds because of the fact that the house that the Kay lived in had a glass door that was broken into and there was glass shattered all over the floor. So they did some research into him and they found that he had an arrest record for drug-related charges and theft, I want to say, was also in there. He'd go to the methadone clinic every single day, and the next day, Mom, Becky, of Michael, was shot in the leg outside of her school, and the shooter said, "Pay your debt or next time I shoot your head." A little side note, I said outside of her school, but what I meant to say was outside of her place of business. Come to find out that Mom Becky had had enough of Michael. She just wanted to kick him out. So they thought this would be a motive as to why he would do what he did, and he had maybe wanted to break in and just steal some jewelry, but instead Kay was home and he had to kill her. And then go next door, steal from his mom. So that was what they thought had happened. And he was brought in for questioning. Then inmate Jerry Jacobs saw the news, I'll tell you about him in a second, and wanted to speak to the lead officer on the case. Incarcerated for a minor traffic infraction, he said he thinks his sister was involved. Turns out, he's Becky's brother. So apparently, allegedly, one day, Becky had called her brother and said that she was having an affair with David Parsons, and that she said her husband Tony doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, and that David did. And she said, "Do you know any way or anyone that can get rid of her and make it look like an accident?" And he brushed it off and said, "No, and brushed it off thinking it was a joke. And she said, "No, I really want her dead. Can we do this?" And he said, "No, we can't." What a solid person. March 27, 2009. This is going to be David's interview. First thing asked was, "Tell me about the affair between you and Becky." And apparently he dropped his head and he said that summer of last year, we all started hanging out playing tennis and stuff like that. And one day Becky came up to David and said, "You know why I suck so bad at tennis? It's because you distract me." Flirting with him. Then it moves on to phone calls and texts, then meeting up for X. I don't know if I could say that word, so I'm just going to say X. You get what I'm saying. They would do it in each other's houses while their spouses were away. Then he described it had gone on for a while. Rebecca, or Becky, was obsessed with David Parsons. She wanted to be with David full time. Becky decided she wanted to tell her husband, and that was when David stated she crossed the line and ended the affair. Becky had given David another phone to use, and he gave it back to her when it was over. Staff Sergeant says, "I have your phone records. I know you talked to Becky the night before this all happened." And David said, "Well, yes, I did talk to her." He said that night they had a long conversation. When asked what about, he said nothing in particular. Then they got involved in phone X. The journalist I spoke of before said this wasn't something that was long gone and over with. She said this proved this affair was still something that was happening up until the murder. Oh, right. Her name was Katie Beasley, the journalist. Okay, so just to correct myself earlier, not really correct, but say that I was correct, it is Michael Bowes. So Staff Sergeant Edmund is still thinking about Michael Bowes, Becky's son, still thinking he's somehow involved in this. Then right at the end of the interview, he came across with one more revelation. He said he asked if anyone else knew about them, and Becky told David that her son Christopher, the older brother, the one that had a house and a car and a job and was doing good, knew that she was seeing someone else, which is one of Becky's other sons, as I mentioned. Christopher is said to be a very loyal son, and that Becky was confiding in him about the affair and that the troubles in her marriage. She was very candid with him. Becky Sears' brother, Jerry, said he knew if there was one son who was sympathetic towards his mother, it would be Christopher, said the journalist that I mentioned above. Jerry said she would call Christopher almost every night and cry and tell him stuff. The journalist Katie Beasley said she felt she had crossed the line and just by what info she shared from mother to son. And I have to agree. based on the fact that she was telling him about affairs and like what Tony didn't do for her. We can only imagine what that means, what David did do for her. I definitely would say, in my opinion, she crossed the line. This is now 62 hours after Kay's murder, and Staff Sergeant Edmonds says, "I think David could very well possibly be involved in this crime, but what better alibi can you have for being thousands of miles away in California? I wasn't convinced," he said. "It was just too convenient." David swore up and down through the interview that he broke it off even though they still had phone X, but he swore he had no clue Becky would go this far as to hurt or get rid of Kay. Staff Sergeant said throughout the interview he was very forthcoming, giving intimate details that were embarrassing and that were very truthful and upfront. Stuff, like I said, that could be embarrassing for David to be telling. So Staff Sergeant Edmonds said he felt that David was telling him most of the truth, if not the whole truth. There was nothing that said he was involved, and he wouldn't want to hurt his son Derek and take his mother away from him. Big twist. You ready? Now, after what he learned, Staff Sergeant Edmund doesn't believe Michael had anything to do with the crime. He now thinks it was Christopher, or likely to be Christopher. So Christopher became the number one suspect, and Michael is released without charges and is no longer a suspect in the investigation. He said, Staff Sergeant Edmund, that he realized he had been focusing on the wrong son. March 27, 2009, Becky Sears and her son Christopher Bowers are interrogated by police. Christopher Bowers' attorney Jacques Hawk, excuse me if I'm saying it wrong, said when they brought him in for questioning, they didn't get very far with him. The interrogation basically said, "Everything you're saying happened didn't happen, and we need you to think long and hard about what you're going to tell us." So Christopher said, "You're basically calling me a liar. One of my friends was killed, and my mother was shot the next day. I want to speak to my lawyer right now." Which is if you ask me, one of the worst things that can happen in an interrogation, because they don't have the defendant locked down in anything. He didn't say a single thing other than, "You called me a liar, my best friend, a friend of mine died, and my mom got shot." That was all that was said. He never admitted to anything, he never alluded to anything. That was all that was said. So he basically shut them down immediately. As I mentioned before, when Staff Sergeant Edmund did some digging, he realized there was a really strange mother-son relationship. Everyone called him a mama's boy, but it was a different level, he stated. He would do whatever it took to please his mom. As he got older, she gave him money, bought him a car and a house. Whatever Christopher wanted, Christopher got. With all these gifts, there were definitely strings that came along with it. And whatever she asked him to do, he would do it for her. They had a bond where he felt as though his mom was upset he was going to protect her. "This is a mom. There are no limits to what I would do for her," is what he would say. Becky, on the other hand, did the opposite. They sat her down, read her rights, and immediately she began talking. She said, and I quote, "I messed up because I made Christopher think I wanted him to do something that was horrible, when I didn't want him to hurt anybody," she says in a shaking, crying voice. She said, "I made him think that I did. He was convinced that he was helping me," she said. What journalist Beasley said she found fascinating was how quickly this loving mother turned on her son and threw him under the bus. She said, she threw him to the wolves so quickly, is what Beasley said. And I agree. Like, you're this loving mother who wants to protect her son, but as soon as you get in trouble, you're like, "Here, please take him. He did it. It was all him. I'm innocent." The sheriff's office was told that Becky would supply Christopher with various prescription drugs. Christopher's uncle, said he stated that benzos, and when he got on them, he couldn't do anything for him. Lundy says drug addicts will do amazing things for their drugs, and that she pretty much sure Becky abused the fact that his mind wasn't clear. Staff Sergeant Edmonds says this time he believes Christopher is so dependent on her and in love with his mother that he would even kill for her. Like, "I need you to do this one thing. Here's some Xanax." I don't know about you, I love my mother, but like Jerry, the brother of Becky, if she had asked me to kill someone, regardless of her giving me prescription medication that I needed or wanted, a house and a car, I would say no. Just like my mom always told me, if I ever got arrested, she's not going to bail me out. She's going to make me learn my lesson. So like, I just can't fathom being that obsessive towards someone. Maybe being reliant drug-wise, but to kill someone, or at least close to death and they end up dying, I can't imagine hurting anyone for someone else. It doesn't make any sense to me. A few hours before Kay's murder, Becky had said early morning she went to Chris's house to pick him up. They went back to her place and he hid upstairs until Becky had left and Kay had left to bring their kids to school. She said on her way out that Christopher was in the backyard. She said she left and she said, well, I don't know where he went. She's not sure if he stayed in their backyard till they left or if he went over to Kay's, but she still says she thought he would change his mind. Okay, so a little break here. In my opinion, if you think he's going to change his mind, that means you're already aware of what he's going to do, right? So like, how can she be claiming she's innocent if you know what he's wanting to do? Anyways, back to the story. So she thought he would change his mind, and she told him, Christopher, just stay here. I'll be back in a little while. And he said he was just gonna do what he had to do with Becky. To which Becky said, you don't have to do anything, is what she's telling investigators. After they all leave, sometime after that time, he jumps the fence and breaks into Kay Parsons' house and begins to assault and murder Kay after rummaging through the house. Becky said he was so sweet, so she didn't think he'd do anything like that, but it also is the reason he would do anything to make her happy. A little creepy. Christopher Bauer's attorney, which was Jacques, I'm sorry, I'm bad at pronunciation, but Jacques Hawk said it's just Rebecca Sears doing what it took to protect Rebecca Sears, and if it involves sacrificing her son, no hesitation. That was his exact words, and I find that to be very accurate. But allegedly, she knew exactly what he was planning to do, which is why she told him to stage a burglary at her house. After all this, he leaves his mom's house with a backpack full of a pair of clothes in the backpack and goes into the woods. Then Becky gets a call from him stating where he is. She picks him up, and when asked if she could see blood on his clothing, she said she couldn't see any on his clothes, but she thinks he had some on his face. She said she asked him, what did you do? She said to Christopher, please tell me Kay is okay. Please tell me you didn't do this. He said, I beat the bleep out of her, was what his mom said that Christopher said. And to me, he had this all planned out. He had a change of clothes and a backpack ready to go. I mean, it's crazy. Becky Sears and her son, Christopher Bowers, are both charged with murder. April 22nd, 2009, Vic and Jacques Hawk were both two attorneys that were hired for both big-name attorneys in town, brothers representing two people separate with conflicting cases. Becky Sears is the mastermind behind this whole thing. She manipulated her son like a puppet master. They got to talking about the shooting that took place outside of her work. She said her and Christopher had set it up, and the police were getting close to her family, and her family, she said, wanted to try and throw shade off of them, says Staff Sergeant Edmond. Becky said Christopher didn't mean to shoot her, that he was going to shoot at her and scare her and say that someone chased her wanting money. They thought this would make the sheriff's department look elsewhere. However, Staff Sergeant Edmonds said they didn't realize it made them look at them harder. The mother and son both pled not guilty to charges of burglary, armed robbery, murder, malice, and felony murder. A news post from the Times said, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for both of them. A journalist said, now that the death penalty is on the table, you know things are about to turn and get even uglier. Jump forward to May 2012. When they decided to make this death penalty case, they then had to make Becky and Christopher two separate defendants in two separate trials. It was mother against son. There was no evidence against Christopher. No DNA, no blood, no fingerprints, no witness, no nothing, except for Becky's statement. Before Becky goes to trial, she drops another bombshell. She had her attorney contact the district attorney and tell him she knows where the bloody clothes and jewelry from the burglaries are. She said they were at her mother's house in the mother's attic in a box. So, law enforcement conducted a search warrant at the mother's home and found the box hidden in the attic. It had everything, all the blood-stained from the victim. It had Christopher's DNA all over it. This is from Low Cards Exchange, and if you don't know what Low Cards Exchange is, it's basically everywhere you go, you leave something. So, by him wearing this shirt, or by him touching this backpack, he is leaving behind evidence that it belongs to him. So they're able to tell, okay, this blood belonged to Kay. This shirt was worn by Christopher. By turning over the box of clothes and evidence and everything they needed to nail Christopher for the murder, in exchange they took the death penalty off the table for Becky. And Vic Hawk said she traded her life for her son's life. Following finding the DNA evidence of the shirt, Christopher pled guilty to murder. So both mother and son ended up pleading guilty to murder and receiving life in prison without parole. Edmund, in response to Becky as a person, said, "I wouldn't even use the word mother to describe her. There are no winners in this game. Everyone lost, just from an affair gone wrong." This has been another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with Shelby. Thank you so much for watching. If you like, please subscribe and like, as I post every Sunday at 5 p.m. And I hope to see you next time. Have a great week. Bye.